Welcome to This Organized Life. If you're a mom, wife, or coffee lover seeking advice on how to reduce clutter and reclaim time, look no further than your host, Lori Palau, founder of Simply Be Organized and author of Hot Mess, a practical guide to getting organized. For a lot of people, clutter is their dirty little secret, but it doesn't have to be. Each week, we will share practical tips, chat with experts, and provide strategies on how to keep you organized. I hope that by sharing our stories, you feel a little less alone and more empowered to tackle the areas that are holding you back. So let's get started.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of This Organized Life podcast. I'm your host, Lori Palau, and if you've been listening to us at least for the past couple of weeks, you know that we've been doing this series on thriving with ADHD, and we heard from a variety of different people. My husband, who talked about ADHD in the workplace. We talked with my friend Christy Lingo, who runs a business supporting mompreneurs, and she talked about balancing work and family and all the things. And then last week, we heard from my very own daughter, Logan, who is in college, and we talked about her thriving in college and strategies that work and don't work. But today, you're in for a really big treat because I wanted to round out this series with somebody who has a front row seat, not just to my own life in the ADHD world, but is really coming in from that true expert perspective. And it is someone who I'd like to consider my friend, although she's also my personal therapist, Kimberly Beall. And Kimberly runs a company called Beleza Consulting. And again, I'm going to have her come out and give you her whole spiel, but she's, a licensed therapist and focuses in on helping adolescents and families and people just navigate so many different areas of life. And like I said, she's at a front row seat working with Logan, helping us with our own family stuff and working with me one-on-one. And so she knows all that I do with this organized life. And when I was talking to her about this particular series, just to kind of pick her brain, I said, you know what, can you just please come on and just share some clinical perspectives, things that you see that you know from a data perspective, as well as just where people are struggling, and maybe provide some strategies that people at home could start to incorporate, whether it's you're struggling yourself or maybe a loved one that you have, whether it's a spouse or a child, might be struggling and you want to be able to support them. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome my friend, Kimberly, to the show. Welcome, Kimberly.
Hi, thanks so much for having me, Lori.
And it's so nice. I know Kimberly moved away from me a while ago. So we've been virtual and Zooming since before the pandemic.
Right.
Yeah. So people were like, oh, I have to see my therapist through Zoom. I'm like, been doing that for years. So
yeah, I remember the first time you told me about Zoom and I was like, what is that? This goes way back. I mean,
yeah,
we're talking, you're like, well, this is this great platform and we can reach you if you, are abroad for a little while. And so
yeah.
that was awesome. It was, helpful. So I was a little ahead of it before it came out.
Exactly. We were pioneers. Well, obviously I come from a very personal perspective. And so my introduction gave, really kind of a very narrow view of like who you are and what you do. But in your own words, can you just like share with everybody a little bit about, your story?
Sure. So I am a licensed professional counselor, and I have an undergraduate degree from Penn State University in elementary education, K through 6. And I believe at this point, it might be even be 8th. It's been so long. So, and then I got my master's from Cairn University in Philadelphia. And then I did all of my clinical hours, my national boards. So I am a licensed professional counselor in the states of Pennsylvania and Virginia. And I can also accept clients in New Jersey because of the reciprocity there. So I worked at a private practice in Pennsylvania for 5 years. And then I opened my own practice 5 years ago, and it's been wonderful. Love what I do. I feel like I'm a paid best friend to people. And there's so much in the field. It's constantly changing and growing, and it really keeps my interest. I'm an Enneagram 7, as Lori probably knows.
Yes.
So
She's
I
a
love,
7 with a very big 8 wing, people. So, which is
yes,
why
yes,
we get along really well. So,
yeah. I can be all business. And so, with the 8, but in my personal life, I am a mother to 3 boys. I'm a boy mom all the way. I have twin boys who are almost 15, and I have a 3-year-old little toddler boy. And my husband is Brazilian. We met in Paris. It's an incredibly cool romantic story for another day. But I love to run and read and work out, hang out with friends. And that's a little bit about me.
and I love it. And again, I've known Kimberly since my kids were much younger. I mean, I think your boys were in like kindergarten, the twins.
Yeah.
And
It was a long time
or
ago.
like first grade, like they were little. And like
Yeah.
for you to say they're like 15 makes me like,
I know.
wow.
I knew Logan before she was a teenager, and now she's 20.
And now she's out of her teens. Like you've known
Yes.
her entire teens.
Yeah.
So obviously, and as I said to everybody in the introduction, we've been doing this series on ADHD and very vocal. We're very public in our family about how ADHD has impacted us. But then we also talk to kind of like my greater Disorganized Life community of how that can show up specifically when it comes to areas like clutter and disorganization, whether that's physical disorganization or executive function and all of the different things. And talked about different strategies that have worked for us. But I'm just wondering from your perspective, what you want to share, what you think would be relevant for us that may just kind of further our perspective on the topic.
Right. So, well, to begin, we can go all the way back really quickly. And in the 1950s, kids were typically diagnosed in the classroom as hyperkinetic. So they saw kids as hyperactive. It was something that was out of the norm. And then it evolved in the 60s so that they believed that there was this attention issue, and ADD was born. By the 1980s, they had attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. And then in the late 90s, early 2000s, the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual number 5, it came out, and they have classified it as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder with subtypes of hyperactivity and inattention. So there's kind of 2 branches. Some people have both, in abundance. So they're inattentive and hyperactive. And some people tend to be underdiagnosed, especially, and they are leaning towards the inattentive. So it's more commonly diagnosed in boys, obviously. It's two to 3 times as likely to be diagnosed in boys, I think. Maybe the statistics even higher. So they present a little differently than girls. It doesn't mean that it's less occurring, because we found that it is very highly heritable, right? So generations pass this down. There's a gene for it. They haven't discovered which one, as far as I know. But if you have one parent that has ADHD, you are 1 in 3 chances more likely to have a child with ADHD. And if both parents have ADHD, then you're 2 in 3 times more likely. So
Wow.
it's kind of, a big thing. It's not just environment. I think a lot of people think, oh, it's environment, it's food, it's vaccines, it's, all this, very busy lifestyle we lead. And although that can probably increase the presentation, it really seems like it is something that is in the genes. So, you spoke a little bit about this executive function. That happens in your prefrontal cortex. And unfortunately, the prefrontal cortex is the last part of the brain to develop. And that's,
I was going to say, that doesn't develop till you're like 25.
Yes, they typically 23 to 25. So, and boys are slower than girls in brain development as well. But the issue with executive function, the prefrontal cortex, is that it's 2 to 3 years slower than their peers, more latent to develop. So executive function is where we do all of our organization, our planning, our ability to have inhibition. So they see a lot of that impulsivity in kids with ADHD. They tend to be very chatty, and girls actually who are leaning towards the inattentive or even hyperactive side, they tend to be told, that they are just chatty. They're just, constantly moving around, want to be with the other girls. And there's this
A
gender.
social butterfly.
Yes, she's a social butterfly. And the boys, because a lot of them tend to lean towards the obstinacy, the boys tend to be more physical than girls. They end up being diagnosed more readily because of those features. Although it can go across the board. So I think the issue with ADHD is they also tend to label themselves. And I hate to share negative things, but they tend to label themselves as stupid and lazy, and that they can't get their stuff together, that they are disorganized. And then the teachers and parents and people in their community, they tend to reinforce that with labels that they put on them as well. I mean, I have a son, he's very low on the spectrum of ADHD, very low, but he's a people pleaser. And so he tends to skate under the radar all the time because he's always trying to do his best. He's not going to speak out of turn as often. And he's definitely not disruptive in class, but he's chatty. And they say he does not use time wisely. And I feel like that's like a label for what they always say.
But that's such a broad spectrum. Like that's such a broad stroke comment, right? Because what does that mean? Like I deal in this in my day to day, so I could probably articulate it a lot of ways, but to the everyday person, like that's so abstract, I think.
Yes. Well,
but it is a commonly used phrase.
Absolutely. And when you say doesn't use time wisely, you have to understand that people who have ADHD are time blind. And they say it best that if you tell somebody that they have to be ready in 15 minutes, they think, I don't have to be ready now because it's now and not now. That's what Dr. Edward Hallowell says. It's now and not now. And so, like say to your student or whatever, your assignment is due in 1 week. They're like, well, it's not due now, and so they tend to procrastinate, but they're really time blind. And you see it, they might be chronically late for appointments, forgetful, losing things, and, scatterbrained. And not that presents with everyone, but I think, that can be a very common characteristic. So time blindness is a real thing.
Yeah. And I mean, we've seen it like with Logan, like that also. And I guess this would fall under it. She's not really understanding how long something's actually going to take. She has no concept of like, this project is going to take 5 minutes or it's going to take 2 hours. Absolutely. Like there's a disconnect, or like to get ready, like, okay, Logan, you have to be at work. And she's gotten so much better. Now, obviously there's been years of very intentional practices and advocacy, and, she does it independently. Obviously, we talked about it on the show, but, that doesn't just happen for a lot of people. Like you have to be really, really disciplined to put those guardrails, because it isn't intuitive.
Right. And I think, with ADHD, you have to understand, or, ADD, but it's ADHD. So I'll just continue to call it that. Yeah. So they really need accommodations for themselves. They develop their own coping skills. Mm-hmm. And so, it's important for them to learn how to deal with this. They have to realize that it can be a superpower. They can have, that hyper focus. They can get something that they've procrastinated on for 2 weeks done in a couple of hours. So they can be highly productive, and they really shouldn't label themselves, they're as stupid or anything along those lines, because they're actually incredibly smart most of the time and incredibly creative. They think outside the box. A lot of them are entrepreneurs. It's something like at least 50% of entrepreneurs are likely to have ADHD, which is so interesting because they're risk takers. And so, it's really an imbalance of their aptitude and their achievement, right? So their aptitude is their ability, their underlying intelligence and ability to accomplish tasks, and their achievement is below that. So that's really the problem here.
You said something earlier that I want to just come back on, which I just found interesting, as you were talking about your son and you said that he's like lower on the spectrum. So we talk about obviously like spectrum of autism and spectrum of other things. So is there a spectrum of ADHD? Because I was either like, you have it or you don't, and it presents differently for different people.
Right.
But, and I was
it's just the term that I'm utilizing. It's
okay.
not, I mean, it's not in the DSM as a spectrum
Okay.
disorder.
I was just curious. I was like, is there something I'm
no,
unaware of?
I see everybody as like within a band, right? Because
Sure.
it's all subjective. Everything is self-report, it's
Yeah.
and with ADHD, it's often like what you've been assessed by the clinicians, your parents, as well as teachers report. So it's not just this, and so I think it depends on that person's perspective. So that, and I say, he is lower on the spectrum. It's really just that he skates by with like 6 out of the 9 criteria, in most of these areas, and doesn't present in all areas, in all places, all of the time, right? All of those criteria.
Obviously we talk about like here, at least with clutter and like that, it's really what's the result of that, right? It's not just about the clutter. It's not just about we want to have an organized space, but it's all right? So that we can have peace, so that we can have calm, so that we can find our stuff, so that we're not frazzled. Like it's what I call the ripple effect of clutter, and obviously what we've talked about a lot, especially throughout this series, was that people who struggle with ADHD have a tendency to have certain pockets, doesn't have to be clutter everywhere, but pockets of clutter where they struggle. And I'm just wondering we talked about a little bit about the executive function part of it, but what have you seen in, from your perspective in practice with people struggling, and how does that impact their world of organization, both the physical stuff and just more of the abstract kind of productivity side?
Well, I've seen that people with ADHD really tend to cut themselves off at the legs before they begin, right? So they because they're labeling themselves as not good in certain areas, they procrastinate because they believe their ability to achieve something is relatively low, or they get really ambitious and they start a project like pulling everything out of their closet or everything out of their office, their desk, and then they run out of time, or because they got distracted, they were like, oh, I ended up looking at old pictures, and then the time got away from me, and they never get back to it. So I think there are things that tend to pile up in their lives, and a lot of them have calendar clutter as well, because they're constantly running from one thing to the next. They love something that's exciting. They don't like boring things. They're highly distractible when they're bored. So they tend to say yes to, social things, like, let's go out, let's do that. And because of that also helps them run from, the clutter in their life, because if you stay moving, you don't have to get stuck in your dysphoria. And a lot of them are diagnosed with it's called comorbid, when things are co-occurring, with anxiety, depression, and as well as OCD and dysphoria. So dysphoria is when you're kind of stuck in this glum place. You tend to get stuck in those negative ruminations, that self-talk, that negativity. And there's actually a reason in their brain, which I can, either go into, or we can save that, shelve that. But there's a reason that their brains get stuck in that instead of in the tasks. They're stuck in that reflection upon the past and the things that they did wrong, and so when you have that guilty conscience all the time, and you're talking to yourself negatively, that will impact you. You don't go and achieve things, you doubt yourself, and so they end up with a lot of clutter in a lot of areas of their life, because they don't feel that they're capable of tackling those things. So they need a lot of their own tips and accommodations to get themselves to change those thoughts, and to get themselves back on track, and they really need less lectures. So when I think of one thing that I really wanted to say to people who have someone with ADHD in their lives that they love, whether it's a spouse, a friend, or especially a child, is that less lectures and more love. Okay, because because they have dysphoria, they tend to really be negative and down about themselves. They also can get very, very stuck in this emotional place where if any perceived criticism happens, they will stay there. They will ruminate on it. They will stew in it. And it will really prevent them from achieving their full potential. And potential is a problem for people with ADHD. They are not achieving their full potential. So then they also are really susceptible to praise. And they call it euphoria, that they love praise. They love encouragement. They need validation because of that negative self-talk they have. So if you can think, most of the time, what happens when someone's not organized and someone's not on time and someone's forgetful is that they get yelled at, right? They get snapped at. They get these negative things thrown at them, or it's your spouse, right? This happens all the time. I have lots of clients whose spouse has ADHD and they go, they started this household chore, this household task or project or whatever, and it's been sitting there for 2 months, or it's been sitting there for 2 years, and they drive me bonkers because it's not finished. And I've said, well, then call someone to do it, take it off their plate, be understanding, and think about intention. They don't have the intention of harming you, of hurting you. This is not like a bad motive here. And so I think when you can have a positive regard for someone who struggles with ADHD and think that their motives were with the best of intentions, then you can make room and grace for all of these little slip ups and things. And then if you're not so hard on them, they tend to do a lot better. So save the lecture is really what I want to boil it all down to.
I love it. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come right back and want to continue this conversation because I think there's some really great points that I want to come back to. That, and all I keep thinking of again is, aside from like all the mistakes that I made as a parent of things that, I've said and whatnot, but it's exhausting, right? And becomes this like loop. And what I've said, because if people are listening and they're like, oh, great, this is me. And now I have all of these things that, yes, I feel seen and heard, but does that mean that I'm destined for this life of disorganization? The short answer is no. It just means, and I've said this before, but it bears repeating, that it just means that you need to find the strategies that work for you so that you can set yourself up for success. And I think that's going to look different. And I'd love to get your thoughts. My general thoughts from the organizer perspective is try to remove as much decision fatigue as you can, right? Like the fewer choices, the better, because we, most of us get like overwhelmed with too many choices. You think, oh, I want to have options, but that can be a detriment. So reducing that, doing things like finding checklists and timers and all of these other things, and consistency. Consistency, I think, is the key, because once you're consistent, that's how you build that muscle memory. And that's how you are able to kind of get out of your head and more into that action mode. That's my organizer perspective. That's not from the clinical, therapist perspective, but I'm wondering if you want to elaborate or comment on that.
Absolutely. So, I do a lot of this solutions-based stuff with people in addition to cognitive behavioral therapy, but which is the self-talk piece and the choosing the behaviors. But so what you spoke about is so important because it's really proven to be effective. These little strategies that you have, and I say set yourself up for success, exactly what you said, with removing that clutter in your life, the decision fatigue. And I do it with my own kids and with my spouse. I have drop zones at the doors that we come in the most frequently. The book bag has a place. Your phone has a place. It gets plugged in every night. Your keys, there's a rack on the door. We don't lose keys if keys are always in the same place. When you have some simple strategies in your house to keep things, organized for you, then you don't have to have as many issues with running around, forgetting, trying to find things. And like you said, with the timer, there's actually a name for that called the Pomodoro method, where they say that the 25-minute timer, if you're going to tidy up a room, sometimes I say to people, get the timer, get a friend, and get some music, because what you want to do is distract yourself. So music is that it starts that kinesthetic thing that people with ADHD love, gets them moving, and keep it simple, right? I've said this many times, KISS, keep it simple, stupid. And not that we want to use that language, but, keep it simple over and over again. That is with everything in life, those SMART goals, small, measurable, achievable, relative to what you're working on, and time-based. So you say, all right, I'm going to do my side drawer, today, or I'm going to just tackle the shoe shelf today. Keeping it simple will help you, as well as that timer will keep you from feeling overwhelmed and exhausted. And that works with schoolwork and everything else. So all of those tips that you said, and accountability, right? So if you are a parent or a spouse and they're not completing tasks, I say sit next to them. Sometimes you don't have to do it for them, just the proximity, right? If you sit in the room with them, they are more likely to clean, right? If you say it's the clutter of the clothes, you set aside a little time, maybe, Thursday night, Friday, or whatever, and you sit down, and I mean, that's what I do with my teenage boys. And I go, I'll put the hangers on. And so that's my role, is I sit in the middle of their floor, and I have hangers in front of me, and they throw me things that go on hangers, and they put everything in the drawers, and I'm just company. And that, we have the greatest chats, but being company for them will help them to be accountable. So maybe you want to stand next to your spouse and hand them the hammer or whatever, if that's the household chore that they're not getting done.
So again, I think you bring up a really good point, because for some people, and even if you're neurotypical, it can become overwhelming. And it's for also a lot of people, like organizing, the process of organizing can be very boring and mundane. And I know I enjoy it and I get like a rush out of it, but that's why I do this for a living. Most people don't. And so finding somebody that can keep you company, that can be a distraction, that can be an extra set of hands, is, regardless of what's going on in your life, is just like more of a common sense approach, I would like to say, to making this project more palatable. And it does go quicker when you have somebody. And I've done similar things with both of my girls, is let me just, I'll help you, I'll keep you company. And it's not a matter of doing it for them, but it's making it just something that isn't as much of a drudgery. And I love that. And it doesn't mean that you're enabling or that you're spoon feeding or helicoptering or any of those other things. It's really just about giving that extra support. And if you're somebody on the receiving end who really feels like, I need that accountability partner, or I need somebody, don't be afraid or ashamed to ask for it. And this goes for adults too. Sometimes kids don't have the language to say, this is overwhelming to me, I don't know how to do this. They just don't have that. They just don't have that the language to facilitate that.
Yeah.
Right. The vocabulary. Thank you. That was the word I was looking for. But adults, like, I just came from a consultation with a new client, and she was like, I just need someone to help tell me what to, like, I need a path. I need a path. And I said to her, you seem like the type, when I originally spoke with her, she's like, I can't do it alone. And after I sat there and like explained things and talked through the process, she was much more like, yeah, I could see it. I could see the light bulb click on. And I was like, I think that you are more like apt than you realize. I think that you are, once you are empowered with like, this is the process and this is what you're doing, I think you're going to be able to navigate this more independently than you were giving yourself credit for. And I say this because I think a lot of times people, especially if they're struggling with ADHD, because maybe they've had an uphill battle, whether it's academically or socially or with other areas, they start to almost just assume that this is going to be another area, or they've struggled there before. And I have seen it firsthand in my own home, not to mention with clients, but I've seen the strides that you can make. So I really wanted to use this series to shed some additional light on it, but to also say, like, you've got this. You may just have to work a little differently.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, one woman said to me that she and her friend will clean each other's houses together, because you always clean better when you have someone with you. And so she's like, Tuesdays we do my house and Thursdays we do her house. And I thought, What a great friendship idea
Wow.
to share. And I am lucky enough here in Virginia to have a neighbor who will just come over with her steam vac, and she will be
I'm
like,
like, I don't even want to
let's
clean
do
my
it.
own house.
I know. Well, she just likes to do the floors. And, I think if you can find friends in your life, if you're offering up food and you're like, we'll make dinner and we'll hang out and we'll do some cleaning or organizing. I know I have girlfriends that I have called up when I was moving before and been like, I need you to stay here for the whole weekend. And we're just going to hang out and we go like room by room together. And I think that that's, if you have friends like that, then that's better than, anything you could possibly imagine, having someone to be accountable with you.
Yeah. And again, I want to just briefly touch on, because you talked about, since you are coming in from the professional perspective of this in this series, you talked about a couple different modalities of therapy that people use that have been successful. And again, we talked about offline, each one of these could be its own episode. So we're not going to go deep. We're just going to give a top line overview. Can you just indicate what are some strategy, what are the different types, and kind of why are they successful for this particular type of a thing?
Well, we talked about solutions focus. That's really just finding a practical way for people to, to deal with these things. And then we have my personal favorite, and I do this one the most, is cognitive behavioral therapy. And that really just means that your cognitions are what lead to, that's your thoughts, they lead to your emotions. So people come in all the time to me and they say, I want to escape these feelings of anxiety. I'm so, I have this fear all the time. It follows me around. Or I'm really angry and, I need some anger management strategies. And I'm like, well, these feelings are not inherently bad. No feeling is inherently bad. They all originate with a thought. And then, so if, say, we're walking down an alley, this is the best way I can think to explain it. There, we see someone walking towards us, we're going to have an instant thought. This person is safe or this person is unsafe, right? And from that thought, we have an emotion. It's either fear or safety, right? I either feel scared, and then I'm going to choose a behavior based off of that. And usually that, for fear, it's fight, flight, or freeze, because you can't decide whether to fight or flee. So, then we work on changing behaviors that are not working for you. We work on changing thoughts. And this is what I call it, but your emotions are the indicator lights, I like to call them, on your car. So if your gas light comes on, we want to pay attention to that. If you have a lot of anger in your life, we want to pay attention to that. What's going on in your thoughts? What's going on in the behaviors, your actions in your life that's reinforcing those thoughts, which reinforces that emotion. And so it's cyclical, and we attack it from the thoughts and we attack it from the behaviors. So, when we think of CBT, it is the most efficacious modality for treating a number of different issues that people come to therapy for. And so that's why it's my favorite. I mean, there's a lot out there of different ones. Some are more utilized in groups, like dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT. There's so many. I mean, I could list every single one out there, but I think
no, God, I'm going to cut you. Yeah. And I love it. And obviously we've got some firsthand experience using that. And again, tie it back specifically with the work that we're doing, I want people to just be thinking at home in their own ways, how they maybe have had triggers. Like, for example, if you're an emotional shopper and it's thinking about, and again, whether, you're working with a therapist, which is probably the recommended way, but you can start to, and you could read up, there's tons of resources about CBT out there. But again, like thinking about every time I get stressed, or every time I have a fight with my spouse or my partner, what do? I go shopping to do that. And then I'm doing that. I get that dopamine hit. And now I have this stuff and it's resulting in clutter. So I get in these like loops and these patterns of doing things because. And so if you wanted to work on that, as opposed to white knuckling your way through it or trying to have willpower, using strategies, proven methods like CBT or with a trained professional are a great way for you to really, again, modify the negative behaviors, or the behaviors that are resulting in like negative things in your life.
Yes. Unhealthy coping strategies, right? A lot of our behaviors become unhealthy coping strategies. And sadly for ADHD, they are, 5 to 10 times more likely to have addiction issues because they're self-medicating. They are struggling with this desire for more all the time that happens with their brain, the way it switches channels. And I want them to remember that there's help out there for them, that what they're doing, is seeking out, whether it's shopping or, drugs, alcohol, cigarettes, whatever it is. There's a lot of unhealthy coping, mechanisms out there that, we can, people can help you. There are plenty of trained professionals out there. And once you learn some strategies, you can start to develop other healthier ones, healthier coping mechanisms. And, you can realize what's happening is not that you're a terrible person and you're trying to escape or whatever, but that your brain is changing channels on you, and it's confusing and it's hard, and you are struggling. And so I really want to encourage people who are struggling that there's nothing wrong with you, that we'll figure it out, and that they can develop some strategies.
I love it. I love it. Real quick. So, I mean, and I know you've given a lot of different things, but if there's somebody out there right now that was saying like, I think my fill in the blank, myself, my kid, my spouse, whatever, what would be like some specific recommendations that you have for them if they are struggling right there? And maybe it's struggling with routine. Maybe it's struggling with, time management. Maybe it's struggling with losing things, whatever it's going to be that you could say. And again, we've said it before. I'm putting the disclaimer. There's not a one size fits all strategy. We're just talking about some common things that you could maybe try for somebody out there at home. Obviously, if you know that you're struggling with this, getting a trained medical professional is always a great thing to have as part of your team in your corner. But just, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, well, we already talked about a couple of these, so I'm just gonna reiterate them. Developing a routine. Exercise is so helpful. It feeds the endorphins, and we know that oxytocin and endorphins can stop that negative rumination cycle for everyone across the board, not just ADHD, but is especially helpful with ADHD. So developing a routine and balancing your hormones, sleeping, eating properly, and organizing your house, like we said, into these easy drop zones. Take away as much clutter as possible. Have a family calendar, post it on the wall, anything to make it a little easier on you. So number 2, is to remember that you're in charge of your brain, and that everything starts with a thought. And so you're feeling out of control. It's because your thoughts are out of control. And you know this from working with me, that I call your brain your TV set, and we cannot control what comes on the TV set. We cannot. And so people always want to beat themselves up for the thoughts that they have that are negative, that come on. And I'm like, no, we couldn't do anything about that. It popped in there. So what you do need to remember is that you hold the remote. You can change the channel, just like, or swipe, right? If you're going to think in terms of YouTube or ads, skip that ad. And so you hold the controls to your brain and to your life. And so when you get stuck in any kind of negative cycle, remember that you can change the thoughts to a positive one. So hold on to that remote. And then I want you also to, if you're the parent or the spouse or the friend of someone, don't waste your time lecturing that person. When you catch yourself wanting to beat up on them or say this, because you're emotionally dysregulated as well, and you're done.
Kimberly has seen me. I know the exact day that she's thinking of right now when I flipped out.
No, I'm not. I was not thinking of that. I was thinking of all the spectrum of people, or all the people I've worked with. But yeah, no.
But yes, there are, like, again, it's true, because it's easier said than done. But the more you practice that as the parent,
Yes. Okay. It's like, I need to regulate myself, and then I will be able to say, okay, I'm going to time out, and I'll come back to this. And, empathizing and encouraging them, and remembering they probably had the best of intentions, and it's negligence. They just didn't, they just forgot, or they didn't remember, whatever. So, and then we talked about setting SMART goals, setting a timer, and, trying to tame that overzealous. Don't get overzealous. Like, don't take on too much at once. Set that small, measurable, achievable goal for yourself. And then also getting a buddy, and finding someone to be accountable, help hold you accountable to things. And if you're the parent, sometimes it's just proximity, that's helpful.
Yep. I love it. I love all of these things. Um, where can people find more, especially if they are in your kind of geographic range of Pennsylvania, Virginia, New Jersey? But where can people connect up, learn more if they wanted to?
Well, more about me. I have
Yeah,
a website, belezacounseling.com. It's Beleza. And I think you're going to have the link,
I
but Beleza
will.
actually means
Yep.
life is beautiful in Portuguese. It's what they say in
Mm.
Brazil. Life is beautiful. Beleza, que beleza. So that's why it's life is beautiful counseling. And so you can find me on my website. And if you want to know more, so I know you always ask people about books, and I am a chronic book reader, but I read fiction. So when
We'll get to that
I get to
in
that,
your
okay,
no, that's right. If you want to
that's a
share like a
resource I was
resource,
going to give
well,
you.
you want to share a resource now, but we'll get to your hot mess minute questions after. But share a resource now for sure if you want.
Okay, so I pulled up two books, the
Ooh,
ADD or ADHD checklist, because Sandra Reif is a leading expert in the field, and that is just a fantastic resource, as well as Dr. Hollowell and Dr. Rady. They work together, and they are psychiatrists, and they are. This book is called ADHD 2.0. That's one of his
hold that up for
newest
anybody
ones.
watching on
Sure. I mean, I'm
YouTube. So
backwards here, but
no, you're fine.
ADHD 2.0.
Okay,
And that's one of his newer ones. But Hollowell and Rife, they have tons.
gotcha.
Um, lots of resources, and you can find them online. But yeah, get some ADHD books. Borrow them like I do from the library, because anytime
Sure.
someone presents something to me, I'm like, I'm going to run to the library and look some things up. So you don't have to spend money.
That's awesome. I love it. All right, we're going to take our last break and come back to our wrap up hot mess minute questions. So sit tight. All right, so we're talking books. And yes, for anybody that's new to our show, we will link up to everything Kimberly in our show, is including her book recommendations, professional and personal. So again, you're no stranger to our show, where we like to learn a little bit about you on the personal side. And so I know you said you read a lot of fiction. So is there and this could be it doesn't have to be a fiction book, it could be whatever, but is there a book that you either want to recommend aside from these professional journals, that, or something that you either go back to has been transformational in your life, something that you want to share with us, either for fun or for education purposes?
Yeah, I mean, I tell everyone about this, and it's probably silly. I mean, it's not silly. It's I don't like to read a lot of nonfiction, but the best autobiography nonfiction book I've ever read was Trevor Noah's biography. He was
Really?
comedy comedian, I guess, on the
Yeah.
Daily Show.
Uh-huh.
And he was born during the end of apartheid in South Africa. And so his book about his life growing up in South Africa is amazing. It's so fascinating, so inspiring. He's funny. So that was a book that I just absolutely love. And when people are looking for something to read, I'm like, get it. It's great. It's awesome.
That's awesome. I
My
love
kids
that.
even loved it. I know.
That's awesome. I love it. We'll definitely link to that and check that out. And then our last two questions, because again, in life we go through seasons, people thrive, people struggle. In this particular season of your life with a 3-year-old and twin teenagers, and a busy practice, where do you feel the most organized and where do you feel like a little bit of a hot mess?
Well, I guess it would go under calendar clutter, although
Okay.
I don't actually fill my calendar. The issue I have as someone who's an enthusiast and world traveler and mom, and business owner is that I want to do everything,
Mhm.
all the time. So my issue is the traffic in my brain. This is my anxious thoughts of, okay, can I fit this in? And if anybody who knows me in my personal life, they know I am the squeezer of things. So if someone's like, do you want to go to the water park this morning? And then we'll go to we'll go to the gym, and then we'll also go to dinner at this great restaurant. And I'm like, yes, let's do it all. And so my kids, like they're always like, just want to sit on the couch, mom. Because I'm a squeezer of all things. And so, especially because I'm at this point in my life, it's so present to me that my kids are going to be gone soon. Every summer to me is like this is my last chance to do this travel and this with that, and I'm like, we got to go to Brazil for a month and we have to go to camp and we have to go, we have to go to the beach. And so I'm trying to, I try to tame that every day because I feel like I wasted a day if I don't try to get everything in. So that's really my biggest issue is I clutter up my life with go, go, go.
And I think that's a really, thank you for sharing that. And I think for so many people, they can relate to that. And it's about, I think, again, this is just my fake psychologist, or my fake therapist, is finding like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like finding fulfillment in the rest, like in the moments where I think so many people attribute it was a productive day is a busy day, or a productive day is we did all these things and made all these memories. And sometimes the memories can be made at home, chilling, resting, playing a game, going for a walk. So it's, and it works both ways. Do you know what I mean? But I think so many times it doesn't mean like we have this image in our mind that, again, like you said, you spend all this time trying to create the memories, but like the memories can happen with intentionality.
Absolutely. And I have to practice what I preach, which I do. And I have clients who are chronically overscheduling themselves with all the parties and all the things. And I'm like, it can be just sitting on the couch and eating popcorn or making pizzas and, just hanging out in your jammies on a rainy day. Like here, it's going to rain for like 4 days here in Virginia. So it's like, that can be a great memory too. And your kids are going to remember those things, that your parent was present, and that's what matters.
Yep. Okay. And ending on a high note, because we know that you are like thriving in a lot of different places. So where do you feel the most confident, the most organized right now at this point in your life?
I think probably with work. I feel pretty confident in, I don't take on too much. I refer out when I'm like, that's not something I really think I can put in my schedule. So I do think that with work, I've really got a good handle on that.
I love it. I love it, for especially not just for you, but for all the women, specifically mom entrepreneurs out there who are out there trying to juggle all of the things and finding peace at knowing what your limits are.
Yeah.
I think that's awesome. That's an awesome example to be setting. So thank you for that. If this is your first time tuning into our show, guys, I'm so glad you're here. You got a glimpse not only from a great professional perspective, but a glimpse into my own life. And again, Kimberly's been pivotal in myself, with Josh, with the girls. So, I mean, really, everyone knows I'm a huge advocate of all things being like healthy and balanced, as whatever balance means, and finding a great therapist that you can work with, even when you're in seasons that are good. To have somebody there, doesn't always have to be in crisis, is so great. So find a therapist if you don't already have one. Make sure that you click the subscribe button, and so that you never miss an episode. And if you like this episode, you think somebody that can benefit from any of the stuff that Kimberly shared, please just click that share button wherever you're listening or watching, and share it with friends, because the more people that find our show, the better it is for everybody. We love being able to share this content and develop new things for you guys. So I appreciate all of your support. I think that's it for now, but if you have questions, you know where to find us, This Organized Life podcast. And until next week, I'm Lori Beall. Peace out. Thanks for tuning in. If you like this episode, please spread the love and share it with your friends. And if this is your first time joining us, make sure to click the subscribe button wherever you are listening so you never miss an episode. And while you're there, please leave us a review so other people know that our show is worth the listen. You can also find us on YouTube and Instagram at This Organized Life Podcast. And if you'd like to connect with us, you can head on over to our website at simply the letter B like boy organized.com, which is filled with tons of resources, including free downloads, checklists, links to our amazing organizing partners, and all of our digital offerings. I'll see you next week for another episode of This Organized Life.